Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're digging into the Bryan Kohberger case again.
Yeah, and specifically we're focused on this stack of sources around a recent Dateline report. It seems like a lot of new information, or at least newly public information, came out.
Right, a significant amount. So our mission, really, is to unpack what was in that report, the surprising details, and, explore what it all might mean as this case barrels towards trial.
Exactly. What does this trove of info tell us? And what are the implications, legally speaking? We're talking Google searches, phone data, even theories about the night itself.
Then we definitely need to talk about the impact of the stuff coming out now, so close to jury selection. Okay, let's get into it.
Let's do it.
So just a quick refresher for everyone. We're talking about the murders of 4 University of Idaho students, Maddie Mogen, Kaylee Gonzalez, Ethan Chapin, and Xana Kernodle.
Yeah, November 22nd, 2022. Horrific event at their house on King Road in Moscow, Idaho.
And Bryan Kohberger, he was eventually linked through DNA, right, on that knife sheath.
That's the report. A KBAR knife sheath found next to Maddie Mogen. That was the key forensic link that led investigators to him.
And the arrest itself, that was December 30th, back in Pennsylvania at his parents' place. It sounded pretty intense.
Yeah, the reporting suggests police were really concerned he might be destroying evidence. They apparently used a drone, saw him inside, then breached the door.
Wow. And he was wearing a black hoodie, they said. His parents zip-tied. It paints quite a picture.
It does. And, of course, it's crucial to remember his lawyers have consistently stated he maintains his innocence.
Absolutely. And this is all happening against a ticking clock. Jury selection for the death penalty trial starts July 30th.
Which is, wow, less than 3 months away now.
Yeah.
So the timing of this Dateline report dropping all this information is definitely notable.
Very notable. The sources are calling it an incredible amount of information, stuff that wasn't widely known. It's like a peek behind the curtain of the investigation.
It really is. And a lot of it seems to revolve around his digital life. The footprints we all leave online.
Right, like the Google searches they reportedly found. This is where it gets tricky, legally speaking. Pornography searches were mentioned?
Yes, with specific terms like passed out, forced, drugged, sleeping. The analysis suggests the prosecution might try to use this.
To show motive, like a fixation.
Potentially, yeah. But you can bet the defense will fight that hard, arguing it's prejudicial, irrelevant character stuff, a classic courtroom battle there.
And it wasn't just that. The Ted Bundy searches, that seemed like a big focus in the report.
A very big focus. Multiple searches for serial killer Ted Bundy, apparently over 3 months, both before and after the murders happened.
And specific searches too, right? Like Bundy's name misspelled, and even a paper by one of Kohberger's own professors about Bundy, August 16th.
Exactly. Ted Bundy on the Malignant Being, that title. And the report gives the context, Bundy's history, Washington State, Florida, sorority killings.
So the prosecution could argue this shows, what, an interest? Maybe even emulation.
That's likely the angle. But the defense will counter, look, he was a criminology student. This was academic research for his studies. It's relevant to his coursework, not the crime.
That's a really key distinction they'll have to argue. And the report mentioned other searches, too. Psychopathy, sociopathy.
Yeah, late September, allegedly searched sociopathic traits in college students. Then in October, can psychopaths behave pro-socially?
Which lines up with that recent defense motion trying to block those terms, psychopath, sociopath, from being used in court.
Precisely. They argue the testing isn't reliable, the labels are just inflammatory. And honestly, it's impossible to know from the outside if those searches were for class, about himself, or something else entirely. The interpretation is wide open.
Okay, so beyond those sort of psychological interest searches, there were more practical ones mentioned, like about police stops.
5 days after he got pulled over near the King Road house, this was the night before classes started, apparently he Googled, "When can a cop detain you?"
Interesting timing, right after being stopped near the scene.
Very. And then, maybe more directly related to the case, the report says 3 days after the murders, he Googled University of Idaho murders for the first time.
And then his own name.
Yeah, his own name, yeah. Apparently watched a lot of content about the case afterward, like 60 items mentioned, YouTube channels, law and crime.
So keeping close tabs on the coverage.
That's certainly how investigators might frame it, showing awareness and monitoring after the fact.
Okay, shifting gears from searches to, like, photos and social media, selfies.
Yeah, selfies found on his phone, some in black hoodies, before and after the murders. There was a specific one mentioned, 10:31 a.m., the morning of the murders, giving a thumbs up in a bathroom mirror.
And what about other people's photos?
Investigators apparently found Instagram photos of female students from WSU and U of I on his phone.
Any connection to the victims?
Well, this is interesting. The source says some of these students were friends with, or followers of, Maddie, Kaylee, and Xana on Instagram.
So not a direct digital link to the victims from him, but maybe showing an interest in their wider social circle.
Exactly. The report calls it a potential tangential connection, something that hadn't really been public before, contrasting maybe with earlier statements suggesting no connection.
Gotcha. Any other digital stuff? YouTube watching?
Yeah, more Bundy content.
Yeah.
In December, watched a show called Ted Bundy, The Essence of a Psychopath, and another show comparing the Idaho murders to Bundy with a thumbnail that actually showed Kaylee and Maddie's picture.
Wow, so that theme keeps coming up.
It does. And one more potentially significant digital point alleged in the report, some kind of anti-forensic wiping on his WSU work computer.
Wiping? When?
In the days immediately before and after the homicides. If that's accurate, you can see how prosecutors would present that as consciousness of guilt, try to cover tracks.
Okay, so that's a lot on the digital side. What about his, physical movements and behavior?
The report touched on that, too. Video footage allegedly shows suspect Vehicle 1, believed to be his Elantra,
The white Elantra, yeah.
circling the King Road neighborhood minutes before the murders are thought to have occurred.
Circling. Suggests familiarity, maybe casing.
Could be argued that way.
Yeah.
And then there's the cell tower data. An FBI analyst is expected to testify his phone pinged near the King Road house 23 times.
23 times between July and early November?
That's what the report indicates. And these were late-night pings. Now, it's unclear if the car stopped near the house during these times, but the phone was definitely in the area repeatedly.
That repeated presence over months. That feels significant. Investigators would likely argue that shows planning, right? Or surveillance.
Almost certainly. And the report also detailed some alleged social interactions, potential issues. There was a pool party in Moscow back in July.
Yeah. What happened there?
Apparently, he made some women uncomfortable. One married woman had to signal her husband. And another woman, Holly, exchanged numbers, got this weirdly formal text about hiking.
I really enjoyed that activity, so please let me know thanks, Dex.
That's the one. She didn't reply. Just awkward interactions.
And issues as a teaching assistant, too.
Sounds like it. Reportedly having a tough time adjusting at WSU, faculty met with him in early November about an improvement plan. This was after an incident where he met a female student at her car and apparently gave her the creeps, according to her account in the report.
So the prosecution might try to use these things, how, to show a pattern of awkwardness or making people uncomfortable.
Possibly. Trying to build a picture, however tangential, of someone struggling socially, maybe exhibiting behavior that feels invasive or unsettling, and trying to connect that somehow to the crimes. It's a stretch, maybe, but they might try.
What about on the day of the murders itself? Phone calls.
After 6 a.m., records allegedly show him calling a phone registered to his father 3 times. One call was long, at least 37 minutes.
Important for the timeline, establishing contact right after the alleged time of the crime.
Definitely. And interestingly, the phone data, according to the report, shows he actually came back to Moscow for a bit after 9 a.m. that morning.
Back towards the scene.
Back to the Moscow area, yeah. Before heading home to Pullman around 10:31 a.m., that's supposedly when that thumbs-up selfie was taken.
So a possible return trip after leaving the immediate vicinity. And the report mentions something about social cues, autism.
Briefly, yeah. It mentioned his lawyers might suggest difficulties picking up social cues could be related to autism, citing the odd example of him supposedly suggesting coffee to the arresting officers.
So another potential defense angle to explain certain behaviors, maybe? Though how relevant that is to the murders themselves is debatable.
Highly debatable. But perhaps the most startling part of the Dateline report was the claim it revealed the investigators' working theory of what happened inside the house. Details they believe only the killer would know.
Okay, this sounds like the core of it. What's the theory?
Well, according to the report, investigators believe Maddie Mogan was the intended target.
The primary target. Do they know why or when she might have caught his attention?
Doesn't say when. But the theory is he went to her room expecting only her, finding Kaylee Gonzalez there too. That apparently threw off his plan. An unexpected element.
Okay, so then what?
The theory continues that Xana Kernodle heard the struggle upstairs, described as a loud struggle between Kaylee and the attacker, and went to check it out.
She heard something and reacted.
That's the hypothesis. The killer then reportedly chased Xana down to her bedroom. And the report says she fought for her life. Suggests significant resistance there.
And Ethan Chapin was in her room.
Yes, either asleep or passed out in the bed. The theory suggests he was killed quickly with one knife strike to an artery.
And there was another detail about Ethan, something disturbing.
Yes, a very disturbing detail included in the theory described by the report, that the killer allegedly carved in some way Ethan's lower legs. If true, that kind of specific, unusual detail is something investigators might believe only the perpetrator would know.
Wow. Okay. And after that?
Then, according to this theory, the killer, possibly exhausted from the struggle with Xana, allegedly sat down in a chair in her room.
He sat down in the room.
Yeah, leaving, quote, impressions from blood on the chair, before finally leaving the house, walking past the surviving roommate, DM, who saw someone leaving and then speeding away.
So this theory attempts to reconstruct the whole sequence, the killer's actions, even his state, like being exhausted and sitting down, based on forensics and witness accounts?
Exactly. It's a detailed narrative investigators have apparently pieced
Okay.
together. But again, this is the theory presented in the report.
And that leads to the huge question. Will any or all of this actually make it into court? What the public hears now versus what a jury is allowed to hear. Two different things.
Totally different things. The analysis in the source material raises big questions about admissibility for a lot of this. Take the porn searches.
Right. Prosecution sees motive, fixation. Defense sees prejudice, irrelevant character assassination.
It's the classic balancing act for the judge. Is it more probative? Does it actually help prove this crime? Or is it more prejudicial? Does it just unfairly bias the jury?
Same issue with the Bundy and psychopathy searches, presumably.
Absolutely. Prosecution. Look, it's a tapestry. It shows intent, admiration, motive. Defense. No, it's academic interest, totally unrelated character evidence. The judge has to weigh it. Probative versus prejudicial.
What about the Britney Spears song, Criminal, mentioned in the source? Or the workmate neighbor incident? Seems even further afield.
Yeah, the analysis questioned the relevance there, too. Unless maybe there's evidence of repeated listening to the song, it's likely out. The neighbor incident. Again, prosecution might try to frame it as showing a pattern, desire to control or watch women.
Invasive privacy, maybe. Connecting it thematically.
Right. But the defense will argue it's completely separate, just trying to put his whole character on trial, which isn't allowed unless the defense opens that door. It always comes back to that balance.
And beyond whether it's admissible, just having all this out there now, weeks before trial, that's got procedural implications, doesn't it?
Huge implications.
Yeah.
The source expressed real concern about this incredible amount of information airing, especially with that non-dissemination order, the gag order in place.
That order was meant to stop exactly this kind of pre-trial publicity from involved parties.
Exactly. So you have to imagine both the prosecution, District Attorney Bill Thompson, and the defense are likely pretty upset about this. It puts information out there that might never be proven or even presented in court.
And it just ramps up the media frenzy again. Didn't they get a change of venue, partly because of media saturation?
They did. Move the trial out of Lada County to Ada County, Boise, to try and find a less saturated jury pool. This kind of national report detailing alleged evidence seems to undermine that effort significantly.
The defense must be worried this just reinforces public opinion against their client before they even start picking jurors.
That's the core concern mentioned, that the public is already deciding guilt, and this report, presenting these details, potentially makes the case seem much more convincing to anyone who saw it. Makes finding impartial jurors that much harder.
So expect this to come up at the next hearing, the final pretrial conference.
Almost certainly. This leak, or release, whatever you call it, and its impact will likely be a major discussion point. And the judge, John Judge, he's probably not thrilled either. He's been trying to walk that line between public access and protecting the trial's integrity.
Right. This feels like it tips that balance quite a bit.
It definitely challenges it.
Okay, so wrapping our heads around this. This deep dive into the Dateline stuff really pulls back the curtain on the sheer volume of information investigators have gathered. Digital trails, behavior patterns, these very specific theories about the crime itself.
It absolutely does, and it really throws the challenge of motive into sharp relief. How does the prosecution try to weave all these threads, the searches, the pings, the social awkwardness, the Bundy interest, into a coherent story for the jury?
Assuming they're even allowed to present all those threads.
Assuming they get past the admissibility challenge, exactly. And it raises those serious questions about trial fairness when so much potentially prejudicial information hits the public domain right before jury selection.
And that feels like the crux of it now. The real drama, legally speaking, is going to be that fight over admissibility. What parts of this massive trove of information will the judge actually allow the jury to hear? That could change everything.
Completely. This dive into the sources shows us the complexity digital evidence, behavior theories. It's a stark reminder of how fast info spreads outside the courtroom and the problems that creates for justice. These details paint a picture, sure, but the court has the final say on what's actually relevant and reliable evidence for the trial itself.
Which brings us to a question for you listening. In a case like this, just drowning in digital evidence and nonstop media attention, how does the release of information like this Dateline report potentially shape public perception, maybe even your own perception, before a single piece of evidence is formally presented in court? What detail from all this stands out most to you? And thinking like a potential juror, how hard would it be to separate what you've heard outside the courtroom from only what's presented inside? Something to think about.